The sound of screaming children was the only music playing in the Moretti mansion for 3 years. Dante Moretti, a man who could silence a room with a single glare, was powerless against the nightly terrors of his twin daughters. He had hired the best nannies in New York, child psychologists from Vienna, and even sleep specialists from Tokyo. They all failed. They all fled. Then came Sarah, a girl with holes in her shoes, and a debt that was drowning her. She didn't have a degree. She didn't have a reference. But on her first night amidst the chaos, she did something so forbidden, so shocking, that Dante reached for his gun before he realized his daughters were finally silent. The rain over Chicago was relentless, hammering against the bulletproof glass of the penthouse like 1,000 tiny fists wanting to get in. But inside the Moretti estate, the storm was far louder. Dante Moretti stood by the window, his reflection ghostly against the dark skyline. He was 32, though the shadows under his eyes made him look 50. He was the Don of the Chicago outfit, a man who controlled unions, shipping lanes, and the politicians who regulated them. He was a man who feared nothing except the darkness that fell at 8 p.m. Behind him down the long marble hallway, the screaming began. It wasn't the fussy cry of a toddler who dropped a toy. It was a primal, terrified shrieking that tore through the expensive silk wallpaper and vibrated in the floorboards. Mia and Bella, his 4-year-old twins. Since the car bomb that took their mother Isabella 3 years ago, they had not slept through a single night. "Sir." Dante didn't turn. He knew the voice. It was Arthur, his elderly butler, the only staff member who had survived the twins' temperaments for more than a month. "Is the new one here?" Dante asked, his voice a low rumble. "She is, sir. Sarah Jenkins. She's young." "I don't care if she's 12 or 80, Arthur. Does she have a pulse? Does she need the money?" "Desperately, sir. Her brother is in debt to the Polish gangs on the south side. If she doesn't pay by Friday, they take his fingers." Dante nodded grimly. Desperation was good. Desperation meant loyalty. "Send her up, and Arthur, tell the guards to stay at the nursery door. If she harms a hair on their heads, she doesn't leave the room." Sarah Jenkins stood in the foyer, her hands trembling as she clutched the strap of her frayed canvas bag. The chandelier above her cost more than her entire neighborhood. She felt small, dirty, and terrified. She wasn't a nanny. She was a waitress who had been fired 2 days ago for spilling coffee on a rude customer. But when the agency whispered about the Moretti job, the one no one wanted, the one with the monster children and the devil father, she had begged for it. $5,000 a week. That would save Toby. That would save her brother. "Miss Jenkins?" Sarah jumped. A severe-looking older man in a tuxedo was staring at her. "Arthur." "Yes, that's me. Follow me. Do not speak to Mr. Moretti unless he speaks to you. Do not touch anything valuable. And above all," Arthur paused, looking at her with genuine pity, "do not expect to sleep." They walked up the grand staircase, the screams growing louder with every step. It sounded like a torture chamber. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She opened the door to the nursery, and chaos hit her like a physical blow. The room was destroyed. Toys were smashed against the walls. Feathers from ripped pillows floated in the air like snow. In the center of the room, 2 identical little girls with dark, wild curls and tear-stained faces were screaming. One was throwing porcelain dolls at a terrified maid who was cowering in the corner. The other was tearing at her own hair, sobbing as if her heart was breaking. Dante Moretti stood in the doorway watching. He looked like a statue carved from grief and violence. He didn't move to comfort them. He learned long ago that his touch only made the night terrors worse. They wanted their mother, and he was just the man who failed to save her. "You have 10 minutes, Dante said to Sarah, not even looking at her. "If they aren't calm, you're fired." Sarah looked at the man, then at the girls. The air in the room was thick with panic. She stepped forward, ignoring the porcelain doll that shattered near her foot. She didn't shout. She didn't try to bribe them with candy. She walked straight to the window, opened the heavy curtains to reveal the stormy night, and did the one thing she wasn't supposed to do. She turned off the lights. "What are you doing?" Dante roared, his hand instantly going to the holster beneath his jacket. "They're afraid of the dark." "No," Sarah said, her voice shaking but firm. She didn't look back at the Mafia Don. She looked at the girls whose screams had hitched into confused whimpers at the sudden darkness. "They aren't afraid of the dark, Mr. Moretti. They're afraid of what they can see." It was a gamble, a massive one. But Sarah knew trauma. She knew that sometimes the world was too bright, too loud, and too real. The room was pitch black, save for the ambient city light filtering through the rain. The twins went silent, their heavy breathing the only sound. Sarah sat on the floor, right in the middle of the broken glass and feathers. "Come here," she whispered into the dark. Dante watched his finger, hovering over the trigger. He had never seen anyone turn off the lights. Every psychologist had demanded night lights, floodlights, brightness to chase away the monsters. But the twins didn't scream. Slowly, hesitantly, 2 small shadows moved toward Sarah. The silence in the nursery was fragile, like a soap bubble waiting to pop. Dante didn't breathe. He stood in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the hallway light, watching the impossible unfold. Mia and Bella approached Sarah like wary feral cats. They were accustomed to nannies who pleaded, who cried, or who tried to force them into bed. They weren't used to someone who just sat in the dark with them. Sarah felt a small, sticky hand touch her knee. She didn't flinch. She knew that if she moved too fast, the spell would break. She needed to anchor them. She needed to do something that would bypass their panic and reach the part of their brains that remembered safety. She closed her eyes and began to hum. It wasn't a nursery rhyme. It wasn't Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, or any of the generic tunes the previous nannies had tried. It was a low, rhythmic, melancholic melody, a folk song she remembered from her own childhood, something her grandmother used to hum when the bill collectors were banging on the door. It was a song of sorrow, but deep, grounding sorrow, the kind that said, "The world is hard, but I am here. Lo, the river runs, beneath the setting sun." Dante stiffened. His blood ran cold. He knew that melody. It wasn't a popular song. It was an obscure Sicilian lullaby from a village near Palermo, a village called Corleone. It was the village his wife Isabella had been born in. Isabella used to hum that exact tune when she was pregnant, rubbing her swollen belly while looking out at the lake. She had never sung it after the girls were born. She died before she had the chance to teach it to them. How did this American girl, this broke waitress with the cheap shoes, know the song of the Moretti ancestors? Dante stepped into the room, his boots crunching softly on the glass. "Stop!" he commanded, his voice a low hiss. Sarah stopped instantly. The girls whined a high-pitched sound of protest. "Who are you?" Dante demanded, ignoring his daughter's distress. He grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her up from the floor. The moonlight hit her face. She looked terrified, her blue eyes wide, her messy blonde bun unraveling. "I'm Sarah. I told you. Where did you hear that song?" He shook her, just a little. Enough to show her he could snap her like a twig. "That is not a song you hear on the radio. Who sent you the Rosses, the Triads?" "I don't know what you're talking about," Sarah cried, wincing at his grip. "My grandmother taught it to me. She was Italian." "Please, you're hurting me." "Daddy, no." The small voice froze Dante in place. He looked down. Bella, the twin, who hadn't spoken a full sentence in 6 months, was tugging on his pant leg. Her eyes were fierce, protective. "Let her sing," Bella whispered. Dante looked at his daughter, then at the terrified Maid. He slowly released Sarah's arm. The red marks of his fingers bloomed on her pale skin. He felt a surge of shame quickly buried under his paranoia. "You have one night," Dante said, his voice cold as ice. "If you are lying to me, Sarah Jenkins, if I find out you are a plant, you will wish you were merely in debt." He backed out of the room, but he didn't leave. He stood in the hallway just out of sight, listening. Sarah, shaking, sat back down. She pulled the girls into her lap. They didn't resist. They curled into her, burying their faces in her cheap cardigan that smelled of rain and lavender detergent. She started to hum again. Within 10 minutes, the unthinkable happened. The twins fell asleep. Dante Moretti leaned his head against the wall in the hallway and let out a breath he felt he had been holding for 3 years. But his eyes remained open, staring at the ceiling. He pulled out his phone and dialed his head of security. "Enzo," he said quietly, "run a deep background check on Sarah Jenkins. I want to know everything. Who her grandmother was, where she was born, who she talks to. Go back 3 generations, and put a tail on her brother." He hung up. The silence in the house was beautiful, but Dante knew better than to trust peace. In his world, peace was just the loading screen for the next war. The next morning, the Moretti household was in a state of shock. The staff moved quietly, whispering in corners. The twins had slept until 8 a.m. Arthur, the butler, looked as if he had seen a ghost. When Sarah walked into the kitchen wearing the simple black uniform Arthur had left out for her, the cook Maria practically threw a plate of fresh biscotti at her. "Eat, eat," Maria said, crossing herself. "You are a saint. A witch, maybe, but a saint." Sarah offered a tired smile. She hadn't slept well. She had spent the night in the small servants' quarters, adjacent to the nursery, listening to the wind and replaying the look in Dante Moretti's eyes. He hadn't looked at her with gratitude. He had looked at her like a predator analyzing a trap. She needed to get the money for Toby and get out. This world, the marble floors, the armed guards at the gate, the volatile man in the master suite, was too dangerous. "Miss Jenkins." Arthur appeared at the kitchen door. "Mr. Moretti wishes to see you in the study." Sarah's stomach dropped. She swallowed the bite of biscotti dry. "Is everything okay? The girls are still sleeping." "Mr. Moretti does not discuss his moods with me. Come." The study was a cavernous room filled with leather books and the smell of cigar smoke and gun oil. Dante was sitting behind a massive mahogany desk reading a file. He didn't look up when she entered. "Sit." Sarah sat on the edge of the leather chair. Dante flipped a page in the file. "Sarah Elizabeth Jenkins, born in Ohio. Mother died when you were 10. Father was a drunk who died 2 years later. raised by your grandmother, Rose Jenkins, in a trailer park outside of Chicago. Grandmother died 4 years ago." He looked up, his dark eyes piercing. "Your brother Tobias owes $40,000 to the Kowalski Syndicate. He has a gambling problem. You dropped out of nursing school to pay his debts." Sarah felt naked. He had dissected her life in less than 12 hours. "Is that a crime, Mr. Moretti?" "Trying to help family. In my world, family is the only reason we commit crimes." Dante said, his voice unreadable. "But there is a gap in your file. Your grandmother Rose. There is no birth certificate for her in the United States. She appeared on the census records in 1960. Before that, nothing." Sarah frowned. She was an immigrant. She came from Italy after the war. She didn't like to talk about it. Evidently. Dante stood up and walked around the desk. He leaned against the edge, crossing his arms. His biceps strained against his white dress shirt. "My security team found something interesting. A manifest from a ship docking in New York in 1959. A young woman named Rosa Giordano. She matches your grandmother's description. She was fleeing Sicily." Dante leaned closer, his cologne sandalwood and steel filling Sarah's senses. "Do you know who the Giordanos were, Sarah?" She shook her head, terrified. "They were the rival family to the Morettis in Palermo. There was a blood feud. My grandfather killed Rosa's father. Rosa fled. If you are her granddaughter, that makes you the descendant of my family's oldest enemy." Sarah gasped. "I didn't know. She never told me. She just baked bread and hummed songs. Please, Mr. Moretti, I just need the job. I don't care about feuds or mafias. I just want my brother to live." Dante studied her face. He was an expert at detecting lies. He saw fear, confusion, and desperation, but he didn't see deception. "The song," Dante said softly. "It was the Giordano family lullaby. My wife, her mother was a Giordano cousin. That is why she knew it." A heavy silence hung between them. The connection was bizarre, tangled in blood and history. Sarah was technically kin to his late wife, tied by a lineage of violence she knew nothing about. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors burst open. It wasn't Arthur. It was Enzo, the head of security, his face pale. "Don Dante," Enzo barked, forgetting formalities. "We have a problem, a big one." Dante's demeanor shifted instantly. The grieving father vanished. The capo appeared. "What?" "The police just found a body in the harbor," Enzo said, glancing at Sarah. "It's Luca Rossi's nephew, and they found a distinctive item in his pocket, a locket." "So," Dante growled. "Rossi's nephew was a junkie. He probably fell in." "The locket, boss," Enzo said, his voice dropping. "It has a picture of your daughters in it, and a layout of this house." Dante's face turned into a mask of rage. He slammed his hand onto the desk, making Sarah jump. "They were planning a kidnapping," Dante hissed. "Rossi was going to take the twins." He turned his gaze slowly to Sarah. The softness she had seen moments ago was gone, replaced by a cold, lethal suspicion. "You show up," Dante said, walking toward her, "the exact week Rossi plans to snatch my children. You, a Giordano. You who desperately needs money. You who managed to put them to sleep so easily, lowering their guard." "No," Sarah whispered, backing away until she hit the wall. "No, I swear. Enzo," Dante said, not breaking eye contact with Sarah. "Lock her in the basement, holding cell. If she is a spy, I will find out. And if she touched my daughters with treason in her heart." He let the threat hang in the air. "Dante, please," Sarah screamed as Enzo grabbed her arms. I saved them, I helped them sleep. Take her away." As Sarah was dragged out of the study, kicking and screaming, Dante turned to the window. He watched the rain. His heart was pounding. He wanted to believe her. God, he wanted to believe her. But in his world, coincidences were just traps you hadn't spotted yet. And he would burn the world down before he let anyone hurt Mia and Bella again. The basement of the Moretti estate was not a place that appeared on any architectural blueprints filed with the city of Chicago. It was a relic of the Prohibition era, a labyrinth of concrete and steel designed for storing bootleg whiskey and, when necessary, enemies of the family. Sarah sat on a cold metal cot, her knees pulled up to her chest. The cell was small, lit only by a single, buzzing fluorescent bulb cage in the ceiling. The air smelled of damp earth and old iron, the smell of buried things. It had been 6 hours since Enzo had dragged her down here. 6 hours of silence. She wasn't crying anymore. The fear had burned itself out, leaving behind a cold, hard numbness. She thought of Toby. If Dante Moretti checked her background, he would find the debts. He would find the desperation. But would he believe that was all it was? Or would he see the frantic flailing of a drowning woman as the calculated strokes of a spy? Above her, through the layers of concrete and marble, the house was silent. Or at least she thought it was. But upstairs in the master suite, Dante Moretti was living in a hell of his own making. It was 2 a.m. The screaming had started 20 minutes ago. Dante stood in the center of the nursery, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. The room was bathed in the harsh yellow glow of the overhead lights, because the previous nanny had insisted light was the cure. It wasn't. "Mia, Bella, please," Dante pleaded, his voice cracking. It was a sound his captains and soldiers never heard, the sound of the dawn begging. "It's okay. Daddy is here." Bella was thrashing in her bed, fighting off invisible demons. Mia was curled in a ball on the rug, keening a high, thin sound that pierced Dante's eardrums like a needle. "Where is she?" Bella screamed, her voice raw. "Where is the singing lady? She had to go." Dante lied. He tried to reach out to touch Bella's shoulder to soothe her, but the little girl recoiled as if burned. "No. You sent her away. You made the dark come back." Dante flinched. The accusation from a 4-year-old hurt more than a bullet. He looked at the chaos around him, the shattered porcelain, the torn sheets. He was the most powerful man in Chicago. He could order a hit on a rival boss with a single phone call. He could shut down the docks, but he couldn't stop his daughters from crying. The door opened. Enzo stood there, looking uncomfortable. He was a man built for violence, not for childcare. "Boss," Enzo said, having to shout over the screams. "The sedatives Dr. Aris recommended." "No sedatives," Dante roared, spinning around. "I'm not drugging my children because I am too incompetent to comfort them." He ran a hand through his hair, gripping the roots, the locket, the picture of the girls, the dead Rossi nephew. The evidence was damning. Sarah was a Giordano. The timing was too perfect. Every instinct he had as a mafia don told him she was a plant. But every instinct he had as a father was screaming that he had made a mistake. "Bring her up," Dante said, his voice low. Enzo blinked. "Boss, she's in the holding cell. She's a suspect." "I said bring her up," Dante yelled, his eyes wild. "Handcuff her if you have to. Put a gun to her head. I don't care. Just make this stop." Sarah heard the heavy steel door clang open. She looked up, squinting against the sudden change in light. Enzo stood there, 2 other large guards behind him. They didn't look like they were there to bring her dinner. "Get up," Enzo grunted. Sarah stood, her legs shaky. Are you going to kill me?" Enzo didn't answer. He stepped forward, grabbed her wrists, and clicked a pair of cold steel handcuffs onto them. "Move!" They marched her up the stairs. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. They were taking her to the garage or the woods. She would never see Toby again. She would never see the ocean she had always promised herself she'd visit. But they didn't turn toward the garage. They turned toward the grand staircase. As they ascended, the sound hit her. The screaming. It wasn't just noise. It was agony. It was the sound of pure, unfiltered terror. Sarah stopped on the stairs, resisting Enzo's shove. "They're still awake?" she asked, breathless. "Move," Enzo said. "Take these off," Sarah demanded, lifting her bound wrists. The fear for her own life suddenly took a back seat to the maternal instinct that had awakened in her the night before. "I can't hold them with these on." Boss said, "Handcuffs." "And I say take them off, or I won't sing a damn note," Sarah snapped. She didn't know where the courage came from. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the sound of Bella's voice, cracking with strain. Enzo hesitated. He looked at the guards, then pulled a small key from his pocket. He uncuffed her, but kept a hand on his holster. One wrong move, Jenkins. Just one. They reached the nursery. The scene was apocalyptic. Dante was on his knees trying to hug Mia, who was fighting him with the strength of a possessed child. He looked up as Sarah entered. His eyes were bloodshot, his face pale and drawn. He looked less like a mafia boss and more like a man at the end of his rope. Sarah didn't wait for permission. She didn't wait for an apology. She walked past Dante, ignoring him completely. She went to the wall and hit the light switch. Click. Darkness flooded the room again, instant and soothing. "Get out," Sarah whispered into the gloom. Dante stood up, breathing heavily. "I need to watch. You are the stress," Sarah said, her voice trembling but firm. She couldn't believe she was speaking to him this way. "You smell like gunpowder and fear. They can smell it too. Get out. Stand in the hall." Dante opened his mouth to argue, but then he saw it. Bella stopped the thrashing. She sat up in bed, her eyes searching the dark. "Singing lady," Bella whispered. Dante swallowed his pride. It tasted like ash. He backed out of the room, motioning for Enzo to follow. He left the door cracked open 3 inches. Sarah sat on the floor. She didn't rush. She let her breathing sink with the room. She waited until the girls came to her. And they did. Like moths to a flame, they crawled off their beds and found her in the dark. They climbed into her lap, their tears soaking her shirt. She began to hum. The Giordano lullaby. The song of their ancestors. The song of the enemy. In the hallway, Dante slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, his head in his hands. He listened to the melody. It was haunting. Beautiful. It was the song his wife should be singing. "Enzo," Dante whispered, not looking up. "Boss?" "Get the car ready. We're going to pay a visit to the south side." "Now, yes." Dante raised his head. His eyes were hard again. Sarah Jenkins might be a witch. She might be a miracle. But she is also a loose end. I want to find her brother. I want to know exactly who owns his debt. And if I find out, The Rosses bought that debt just to plant her here." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The look on his face promised a violence that would make the devil blush. Inside the room, Sarah rocked the girls. She whispered stories to them in the dark, stories about a brave mouse and a friendly giant. She smoothed their hair. She felt a connection to them that terrified her. She shouldn't care. She was a prisoner here. But as Bella's breathing deepened into sleep, Sarah kissed the top of her head. "I won't let the bad men get you," she whispered to the sleeping children. "Not the ones outside, and not the one in the hallway." She didn't know that the man in the hallway was currently planning a war to find out if she was worth saving or killing. The dawn broke grey and cold over Chicago. The rain had stopped, leaving the city scrubbed clean and stark. Sarah hadn't slept. She had dozed intermittently, her back against the side of the twins' bed, one hand holding Mia's, the other holding Bella's. Every time she tried to pull away, they whimpered, tightening their grip. At 7:00 a.m., the door creaked open. Sarah stiffened, expecting Enzo and the handcuffs. Instead, it was Dante. He had changed his clothes. He wore a sharp charcoal suit, a black crisp shirt and a silk tie. He looked immaculate, armored against the world. But Sarah saw the fatigue etched around his eyes. He held a silver tray with a steaming cup of coffee and a plate of toast. Sarah stared at him. The Don of the Chicago outfit was bringing her breakfast. "They are still asleep," Dante noted quietly, placing the tray on a small table near the door. "They had a hard night," Sarah whispered, carefully extracting her hands from the girl's grip. She stood up, her joints popping. She felt gross. She was still wearing the same clothes from yesterday now, wrinkled and smelling of the basement cell. "Drink," Dante commanded softly. "You look like a corpse." Sarah took the coffee. Her hands shook slightly as she lifted the cup. "Am I going back to the basement?" Dante looked at her. The morning light caught the stray hairs escaping her bun. He saw the bruise on her wrist where the handcuffs had been. A flicker of guilt crossed his face, quickly suppressed. "That depends," Dante said, "on what my men find." "My brother," Sarah said, putting the cup down with a clatter. "You said you were looking into him. Is he okay? Did the Kowalskis hurt him?" Dante walked to the window, looking out at the sprawling grounds of the estate. "The Kowalskis don't have his debt anymore." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "What?" "Who does?" Dante turned. "I do." Sarah blinked. "You paid it." "I bought it," Dante corrected. "There is a difference. As of 4 a.m. this morning, Tobias Jenkins owes me $40,000. Which means, Sarah, that you work for me now. Indefinitely." "You can't do that," Sarah hissed, keeping her voice low so as not to wake the girls. "I'm not a slave." "You are a liability that I am turning into an asset," Dante said coldly. "However, there is a complication. When my men went to pick up Tobias to explain the new arrangement, he was gone." "Gone?" Sarah took a step forward. "Gone where?" "His apartment was tossed, signs of a struggle, and we found this tacked to his door." Dante reached into his pocket and pulled out a playing card. It was the Queen of Hearts, but the face of the Queen had been scratched out with a black marker, and a crude drawing of a locket was sketched over it. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "The Rosses have him," Dante said, his voice deadly calm. "Which confirms two things. One, you were likely telling the truth. If you were working for them, they wouldn't need to snatch your brother as leverage." Sarah felt a wave of relief so strong she nearly collapsed, followed instantly by a wave of terror. And the second thing, too. The Rosses are desperate. They failed to kidnap the girls with the locket plan, so now they are going to try to trade your brother for access to this house. They think you will open the door for them. I would never, Sarah cried. They don't know that, Dante said. He walked over to her, invading her personal space. He towered over her. They are going to call you Sarah. Probably on a burner phone they've planted in your things, or they'll call the house line asking for you. They will tell you that if you don't unlock the service gate at midnight, they will kill Tobias. Sarah began to shake. What do I do? Please, you have to help him. Dante studied her face. He reached out his hand, hovering near her cheek before he pulled it back. I protect what is mine. You are my employee now. Your debt is to me. That makes you mine to protect. The words hung in the air, heavy and ambiguous. Mine. But, Dante continued, his eyes narrowing. We have a bigger problem. The locket found on the dead nephew, it contained a layout of the nursery. A layout that was renovated only 3 months ago. Only the staff and the contractors knew it. You think there's a spy here? Sarah realized. I know there is, and until I find them, you trust no one. Not Arthur, not the maids, not even the guards outside that door. You trust only me. Do you understand? Sarah nodded, her throat dry. Yes. Good. Now get showered. There are clothes in the closet. You're not going back to the basement. You're staying in the nursery. You don't leave the girls' side. If the Pope himself comes to the door, you don't open it unless I am standing next to him. The day passed in a blur of tension. The house felt like a bomb waiting to detonate. The storm outside had cleared, but the atmosphere inside was electric. Sarah stayed in the nursery. She played with Mia and Bella, building castles out of blocks, but her eyes were constantly darting to the door. Every creak of the floorboards made her jump. At 2:00 p.m., the nursery door opened. It was Maria, the cook. She was pushing a cart with lunch. Lunchtime picolinas, Maria said, her voice cheerful but her smile tight. And for you, Sarah, some soup. Sarah moved to block the girls from the cart. Dante's warning rang in her ears. Trust no one. Thank you, Maria, Sarah said. Just leave it there. I'll serve them. Maria hesitated. Her eyes flicked toward the window, then back to Sarah. She looked nervous. Sweat beaded on her upper lip. I made them special chocolate milk, Maria said, reaching for a pitcher. They love it. Let me pour. No, Sarah said, perhaps too loudly. Maria flinched. The pitcher knocked against the side of the cart, and the lid rattled. A small white powder residue was visible on the rim of the glass pitcher just for a second before Maria covered it with her hand. Sarah's heart stopped. It wasn't just a spy. It was the cook, the grandmotherly woman who had fed Dante since he was a boy. Maria, Sarah said, her voice shaking. Why don't you drink a glass first? Maria went pale. She stared at Sarah, her hands trembling. I'm not thirsty. Drink it, Sarah commanded. She grabbed the pitcher. Maria suddenly lunged. She wasn't reaching for the milk. She was reaching into her apron pocket. She pulled out a serrated steak knife. I'm sorry. Maria sobbed, tears streaming down her face. They have my son. The Rosses have my Marco. She lunged at Bella. No! Sarah screamed. She didn't think. She threw herself across the room, tackling the 4-year-old to the ground, just as Maria slashed downward. The knife missed Bella, but sliced through the sleeve of Sarah's cardigan, cutting a deep gash into her upper arm. Blood sprayed onto the white rug. Mia screamed. Maria raised the knife again, sobbing hysterically. "Move, Sarah. I have to. They'll kill Marco." Sarah kicked out her foot, connecting with Maria's shin. But the older woman was fueled by adrenaline and desperation. She shoved Sarah back, raising the knife for a killing blow on the child. The door exploded inward. Dante didn't just open the door, he kicked it off its hinges. He had been watching the room via the hidden camera he had installed that morning, the one he hadn't told Sarah about. He saw the blood. He saw the knife. 2 shots rang out. Bang! Bang! Maria dropped the knife. She staggered back, hitting the wall, clutching her shoulder where Dante had winged her. He didn't shoot to kill. He needed her to talk, but he shot to stop her. Dante was across the room in a heartbeat. He didn't go to Maria. He went to Sarah and the girls. He dropped to his knees, sliding in the blood. "Bella, Mia, they're okay." Sarah gasped, clutching her bleeding arm. "She didn't touch them. I got them." Dante looked at Sarah. Her blood was soaking into her cheap clothes. She was pale, shaking, and clearly in shock. But her body was still curled protectively around his daughter's. He looked at Maria, who was wailing on the floor, as Enzo and the guards rushed in to secure her. "Get the medic," Dante barked at Enzo, "and take Maria to the soundproof room. I want to know everything she knows before she bleeds out." Dante turned back to Sarah. He reached out his hands, covered in her blood, and ripped the sleeve of his expensive shirt to make a tourniquet. "You saved them." Dante whispered, his voice thick with emotion he couldn't suppress. He tied the cloth around her arm tight. Sarah hissed in pain, tears finally spilling over. "She said they have her son, just like Toby." Dante's eyes darkened. The Rossis weren't just attacking. They were dismantling his house from the inside out, using his people's love for their families against them. It was cruel. It was brilliant. It was war. "I will get a Toby back," Dante vowed, looking into Sarah's eyes. The barrier between boss and employee, between noble and peasant, was gone. There was only blood and survival. "And I will rain hell on the Rossis for making Maria do this." He scooped up Bella in one arm and offered his other hand to Sarah. "Can you stand?" "I think so." "Good, because we are leaving. The house is compromised. We're going to the safe haven." "Where is that?" Sarah asked, wincing as she stood. Dante looked at her, his expression fierce. "The one place the Rossis will never look. The place where your song comes from." "Sicily?" Sarah asked, shocked. "No," Dante said, guiding them out of the blood-splattered nursery. "Little Italy, the old church, my territory. We're going to ground Sarah, and tonight the Rossis are going to learn why you don't touch a Moretti." The convoy of black SUVs sped through the slick streets of Chicago, cutting through red lights like sleek iron sharks. Inside the lead vehicle, the atmosphere was suffocating. Sarah sat in the back, her injured arm throbbing in rhythm with her heartbeat. Mia and Bella were sandwiched between her and Dante, both girls clinging to Sarah's good side, burying their faces in her blood-spotted cardigan. Dante was on the phone, his voice a low, terrifying monotone. He was speaking Italian rapid-fire and harsh. Sarah caught words she recognized from her grandmother's angry mutterings. "Vendetta sangue, blood more to death. We are going to St. Jude's," Dante said, ending the call and turning to Sarah. "It's an old parish in Little Italy. The priest, Father Thomas, owes my father his life. It has a crypt that served as a bomb shelter during the Cold War. It is the only place I can guarantee is secure. And Toby? Sarah asked, her voice tight with pain. And Maria's son? Enzo has located them. Dante said, his eyes scanning the perimeter as the car slowed. The Rossis are holding them at a meat-packing plant in the Fulton Market district. It's soundproof, easy to clean. Sarah shuddered. The implication was clear. The car screeched to a halt in front of a looming Gothic stone church. Rain began to fall again, washing away the blood on the sidewalk, but not the stain on the night. Dante ushered them inside, past the confused young altar boys, and straight into the vestry, where an elderly priest waited. Dante. Father Thomas nodded, his face grave. He saw the blood on Sarah's arm, and the terror in the twins' eyes. The crypt is ready. They descended into the cool stone belly of the church. The room was sparse cots, bottled water, and a heavy iron door that locked from the inside. "Stay here," Dante commanded. He knelt before the twins. "Mia Bella, look at me." The girls looked at their father. For the first time, he didn't look like a distant giant. He looked like a shield. "I have to go and fix the bad things," he said softly. "Sarah is in charge. You listen to her. You do not open this door for anyone but me. If I don't come back—" He paused, his throat working. "If I don't come back, Uncle Enzo will take care of you." "No," Bella cried, grabbing his lapel. "Don't go." Dante kissed her forehead, then stood up and turned to Sarah. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a sleek black 9mm pistol. "Do you know how to use this?" Sarah stared at the gun. "I've shot cans off a fence with my brother." "Point and squeeze," Dante said, pressing the cold metal into her good hand. "If that door opens and it isn't me or Enzo, empty the clip." He looked at her, his dark eyes searching hers. There was a moment, a fleeting electric second, where he looked like he wanted to say something else. Something about how she saved his children. Something about how she, a Giordano, was the only person he trusted in a world of traitors. "Come back," Sarah whispered. Dante nodded, once turned, and the heavy iron door clanged shut, sealing them in silence. The warehouse, 11:00 p.m. Dante. Moretti did not sneak into the Rossi stronghold. He didn't believe in stealth when his family was threatened. He believed in shock and awe. He drove his SUV straight through the loading bay doors of the meat-packing plant, the crash of metal and shattering glass announcing his arrival like a thunderclap. Before the Rossi soldiers could recover from the impact, Dante was out of the car. He moved with the lethal grace of a tiger. 2 shots, 2 men down. He took cover behind a forklift as bullets sparked against the concrete floor. "Moretti!" screamed a voice from the catwalk above. It was Luca Rossi, the Don of the rival family. He was a bloated, sweaty man who smelled of cheap cigars and fear. He was holding a terrified young man by the collar, Tobias, Sarah's brother. Next to them, bound to a chair, was Marco Maria's son. "You have a lot of nerve coming here alone," Luca laughed, pressing a gun to Toby's temple. "I'll blow his brains out before you take a step." "I'm not alone," Dante called out, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. Suddenly the skylights above shattered. 4 of Dante's best enforcers, rappelling from the roof, dropped into the fray. Chaos erupted. Dante didn't wait. He sprinted across the open floor, firing upward. He wasn't aiming for Luca. He was aiming for the hydraulic line of the crane above the catwalk. The bullet struck true, The line burst, hissing violently, and the heavy crane hook swung wildly, smashing into the catwalk railing. The metal groaned and buckled. Luca lost his balance, stumbling back. In that split second of distraction, Toby, fueled by the adrenaline of the doomed, threw an elbow into Luca's gut and dove to the side. Dante climbed the access ladder, ignoring the bullets whizzing past his ears. He vaulted onto the catwalk. Luca Rossi was scrambling for his dropped gun. Dante kicked it away. He grabbed Luca by the lapels of his expensive suit and slammed him against the wall. "You touched my house." Dante snarled, his face inches from Luca's. "You turned my cook. You tried to kidnap my daughters." "It's business, Dante." Luca pleaded, his eyes wide. "Just business. The Giordanos." "The Giordanos are dead," Dante roared. "And she's a Moretti now." He didn't kill him. Death was too easy. Dante pistol-whipped him, knocking him unconscious instantly. He would let the police and the corrupt judges on his payroll handle Luca. He wanted him to rot in a cell watching the Moretti empire grow while his own crumbled. Dante cut Marco loose. The boy was weeping, bruised but alive. He grabbed Toby, who was shaking violently. "Are you Tobias?" Dante asked, holstering his weapon. Yes. Who are you?" "I'm the guy who paid off your debt," Dante said, wiping blood from his cheek. "Let's go. Your sister is waiting." St. Jude's Crypt. 200 a.m. The hours had dragged like centuries. Sarah had sung every song she knew. She had told the twins every story she could remember. The girls had finally fallen asleep on the cots, exhausted by trauma. Sarah sat by the door, the gun heavy in her lap. Her arm was burning with a feverish heat. She felt lightheaded. The loss of blood was catching up to her. Thump, thump, thump. 3 knocks, heavy, deliberate. Sarah raised the gun, with shaking hands. "Who is it?" "It's Dante." Sarah scrambled to unlock the heavy bolts. She swung the door open and nearly collapsed with relief. Dante stood there, his shirt ruined, his face bruised but alive. Behind him stood a terrified, skinny young man with familiar blue eyes. "Toby," Sarah cried, dropping the gun. She tried to run to him, but her knees gave way. The room spun. The last thing she felt was Dante's arms catching her before she hit the stone floor. Sunlight. Bright, sterile, white sunlight. Sarah blinked her eyes open. She wasn't in the crypt. She wasn't in the nursery. She was in a hospital room. A very expensive private hospital room. There were fresh flowers on the table. Lilies. She tried to sit up, but a sharp pain in her arm stopped her. She looked down. Her arm was bandaged professionally, an IV line running into her hand. "Careful," a deep voice rumbled from the corner. Dante was sitting in a wing-back chair reading a newspaper. He looked tired but clean-shaven. He was wearing a casual sweater, which made him look less like a mob boss and more like a dad. "The girls," Sarah asked, her voice raspy. "They are in the next room watching cartoons with your brother," Dante said, folding the paper. "Toby is fine. A few bruises. He ate enough breakfast for 3 men." Sarah relaxed back into the pillows. "And Maria's son?" "Safe. Maria has been retired," Dante said, choosing his words carefully. "She has been sent to live with relatives in Florida. She will not return to Chicago. I do not forgive traitors, Sarah, but I understand mothers. She did it to save her son. For that, I let her live." He stood up and walked to the side of her bed. He looked at her with an intensity that made Sarah's breath hitch. "Why did you do it?" he asked quietly. "You could have run. When Maria pulled that knife, you could have run out the door. You owe me nothing." I couldn't leave them, Sarah said simply. They're just little girls, Dante. They didn't ask for this life. Neither did you. Dante reached into his pocket and pulled out a velvet box. He placed it on the table. I had your grandmother's records unsealed, Dante said. Rosa Giordano didn't just flee the feud. She fled because she was in love with a Moretti, my great-uncle. They were forbidden lovers. She was pregnant when she left. Sarah's eyes went wide. What it means, Dante said, a small, crooked smile touching his lips, that the reason you know that lullaby is because your grandmother sang it to her secret lover. It means you aren't just an employee, Sarah. You are distant family. You have Moretti blood. The revelation stunned her. The connection wasn't just coincidence. It was fate. The feud that had destroyed so many lives had finally come full circle, not in blood, but in healing. The doctor says you need 2 weeks to recover, Dante said, his tone shifting to business, though his eyes remained soft. After that, you have a choice. I have deposited $100,000 into an account for you and Toby. You can take him move to California, start a bakery, do whatever you want. You will never see me again. Sarah felt a cold knot in her stomach at the thought. And the other choice? Dante leaned closer. He took her hand, the one not connected to the IV. His thumb brushed over her knuckles. Or, he whispered, you come back home, not as a maid, not as a nanny. The girls, they haven't stopped asking for you. They slept through the night last night, Sarah, because they knew you were in the building. And you, Sarah asked, her heart pounding, do you want me there? Dante Moretti. The man who feared nothing looked terrified for a brief second. I haven't slept through the night in 3 years, he confessed softly, until I heard you singing in the dark. He didn't say I love you. It was too soon for that. But he said everything else. Sarah squeezed his hand. I don't like California. It's too sunny. Dante smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. He leaned down and pressed a kiss to her forehead, lingering there. Get some rest, he said. We're going home tomorrow. 6 months later. The Moretti estate was no longer silent. It was filled with noise, the sound of Toby laughing as he chased the twins through the garden, the sound of music playing from the open windows. In the nursery, the lights were off. Dante stood in the doorway, his arm around Sarah's waist. She was no longer wearing a uniform. She wore a silk dress, her hair loose. Inside the room, Mia and Bella were tucked into bed. They weren't screaming. They weren't crying. Sing it again, Mama, Sarah, Bella whispered. Sarah leaned her head against Dante's shoulder. He tightened his grip on her, pulling her close. The ghosts were gone. The feud was over. The poor maid had done the unthinkable. She had turned a house of war into a home. Sarah took a breath, and in the darkness the melody began. Lo, the river runs. And for the first time in forever, everyone in the Moretti house slept in peace. And that, my friends, is the incredible story of how a simple lullaby ended a mafia war. Sarah didn't just save the twins from their nightmares. She saved Dante from his own darkness. It just goes to show that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a gun or a bomb. It's kindness, bravery, and a haunting melody from the past. I really hope you enjoyed this roller coaster of romance, danger, and redemption. It took a long time to write this one out. So if you did enjoy it, please do me a huge favor. Smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. What do you think? Was Maria's betrayal forgivable? Would you have stayed with Dante? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. Thanks for watching and sweet dreams.